Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Monday, October 14th. I hope you guys had a good weekend. We had a great one around here, but it's back to the grind. So I have 2 live streams going all week. The first, Sarah Boone, although jury selection is not allowed to be live streamed, I do have a chat going just so you can come chat about the case and get ready for openings, maybe a day or 2 for jury selection. But as soon as openings begin, I'll be live streaming from start to finish each day. Then in the evening, I'll recap today's testimony in an hour or less. Also, I have a live stream going for Leilani Simon, who is accused of killing her son, Quentin Simon. I won't be able to cover that one right now as far as update episodes, but I do have that live stream going if you want to watch the trial and chat with other Alibiers. And today we're going to start reading through Cassie Ventura's lawsuit against Diddy. So much respect for Cassie in taking on Diddy, who is a very, or probably safe to say was, a very powerful man in the entertainment industry, and told her story and the horrible abuse that she suffered. I do think this is a good foundation of what we expect to see come out at trial. She did demand a jury trial for this. However, Diddy settled with her the next day. There is a trigger warning on this lawsuit. This document contains highly graphic information of a sexual nature, including sexual assault. This is your warning to skip this episode if you are sensitive to these kind of allegations. I may word things differently just to keep it a little more guideline friendly for YouTube, but we will read this entire lawsuit. So the preliminary statement: defendant Sean Combs is a rapper and record executive, popularly known by his stage names Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, or Diddy. Mr. Combs came to fame in the early 1990s with his record label Bad Boy Records. He rose to prominence in the music and entertainment industry over the decades and is regularly referred to as a hip-hop mogul. In 2022, Mr. Combs received the Lifetime Achievement Awards at the BET Awards. During his acceptance speech, Mr. Combs stated, "I have to give a special shout out. Thank you to the people that was really there for me." He named a number of people before adding, "and also Cassie for holding me down in the dark times, love." The truth, however, is that Cassie, Miss Cassandra Ventura, was held down by Mr. Combs and endured over a decade of his violent behavior and disturbed demands. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. For Miss Ventura, the dark times were those she spent trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. Among other violent and unlawful acts, Mr. Combs sexually assaulted Miss Ventura in her own home after she tried to leave him, often punched, beat, kicked, and stomped on Miss Ventura, resulting in bruises, burst lips, black eyes, and bleeding. Blew up a man's car after he learned that he was romantically interested in Miss Ventura. Forced Miss Ventura to engage in sex acts with male sex workers while pleasuring himself and filming the encounters. Ran out of his apartment with a firearm in pursuit of a rival industry executive whom he learned was nearby. Demanded that Ms. Ventura to carry his firearm in her purse just to make her uncomfortable and demonstrate how dangerous he is. And introduced Ms. Ventura to a lifestyle of excessive alcohol and substance abuse and required her to procure illicit prescriptions to satisfy his own addictions. Ms. Ventura met Mr. Combs in 2005 when she was 19 years old and he was 37 years old. He signed her to his label, Bad Boy Records, and within a few years lured Ms. Ventura into a fast-paced and drug-fueled lifestyle and into a romantic relationship with him, her boss, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, and a cruel and controlling man nearly 2 decades her senior. Mr. Combs asserted complete control over Ms. Ventura's personal and professional life, thereby ensuring her inability to escape his hold. He provided unprecedented avenues for success for the aspiring artist, but in return, demanded obedience, loyalty, and silence. Throughout their relationship, Mr. Combs was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Ms. Ventura savagely. These beatings were witnessed by Mr. Combs's staff and employees of Bad Boy Entertainment and Mr. Combs's related businesses, but no one dared to speak up against their frightening and ferocious boss. Following these episodes of horrific abuse, Mr. Combs would immediately attempt to hide Ms. Ventura and the evidence of his violent rage. He often showered her with gifts following incidents of physical violence, a typical pattern of behavior by serial abusers. In addition to the physical assaults, Mr. Combs frequently reminded Ms. Ventura of his ability to cause serious harm, whether by requiring her to carry his gun in her purse or by blowing up the car of a musician that was romantically interested in Ms. Ventura. Adding insult to injury, Mr. Combs used illegal substances and threats of violence to force Ms. Ventura into repeated, unwanted sexual encounters with male sex workers. Over the years that Mr. Combs abused Ms. Ventura physically and sexually, she again and again tried to escape his tight hold over her life. Every time she hid, Mr. Combs's vast network of corporations and affiliated entities found her, and those who worked for Mr. Combs's companies implored her to return to him. Many went as far as to explicitly state that her failure to return to Mr. Combs would hinder her success in the entertainment industry. When she believed she had finally separated from her longtime abuser, she joined Mr. Combs for a dinner, after which he forced her into her home and sexually assaulted her while she repeatedly said no and tried to push him away. Ms. Ventura has now fully escaped Mr. Combs, but the harm that the assaults and sexual abuse he caused her to experience for nearly a decade will forever haunt her. She has required intensive medical and psychological care to recover from the trauma she lived through. She cannot, however, continue to live in silence about what she endured. Mr. Combs remains immensely powerful and immensely dangerous. Ms. Ventura therefore seeks justice for the decade of her life that Mr. Combs took away from her with threats of violence, excessive use of drugs, physical and psychological abuse, and sexual slavery. They go on to talk about the parties other than Diddy: Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records LLC, as well as Epic Records, which is a record label owned by Sony Music Entertainment, as well as Combs Enterprises LLC. Moving on to the factual allegations in this lawsuit. Teenaged Ms. Ventura meets middle-aged Mr. Combs as her career begins. Ms. Ventura met Mr. Combs in late 2005 or early 2006 after Mr. Combs heard Ms. Ventura's first single playing in a club and expressed interest in signing her to his label, Bad Boy Records. At the time, Ms. Ventura was 19 years old. Mr. Combs was 37 years old. Within months, in February 2006, Ms. Ventura signed a 10-album deal with Mr. Combs's record label. Ms. Ventura's first album, Cassie, was released in August 2006, debuting at number 4 on the U.S. Billboard 200. To promote the album, Ms. Ventura made television appearances on MTV's Total Request Live and BET's 106 in Park. Ms. Ventura suffered from significant performance anxiety during these appearances, and press outlets were highly critical of Ms. Ventura's performances on these shows. Mr. Combs, however, sought to rehabilitate his newly signed talent, telling MTV News, "You could hear the nervousness in her voice, and, to be honest, I kind of smiled at it because it made me really appreciate what I really love about her. She's a regular person. It just made me appreciate that she got nervous, and it was kind of cute to me, to be honest. You've got to understand that success for her is coming out of nowhere. It's just so huge, and sometimes everybody handles it differently." While clearly paternalistic in noting that it was cute to him how regular Miss Ventura appeared, Mr. Combs' comments rang true to some extent. Upon signing with Bad Boy Records, Ms. Ventura was quickly thrust into the spotlight and was unfamiliar with how to navigate her new celebrity status. Mr. Combs's recognition and glorification of Miss Ventura's naiveness proved to set the groundwork for his manipulated and coercive romantic and sexual relationship with Miss Ventura, a woman nearly 2 decades his junior. Within a year of signing with Bad Boy Records, Mr. Combs became deeply entrenched in Miss Ventura's life, almost immediately asserting possession and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and her personal life. In November 2006, Mr. Combs invited Ms. Ventura to perform his song Come to Me along with him at the MTV Europe Music Awards in Copenhagen, Denmark. After rehearsal for the performance, Mr. Combs walked around in a robe with a drink in his hand, flaunting his lavish party lifestyle to his label's newly signed artist. During hair and makeup leading up to the performance, Ms. Ventura's hairstylist and Mr. Combs's makeup artist told Ms. Ventura that Mr. Combs was interested in Ms. Ventura. Ms. Ventura shrugged off the gossip and, in fact, expressed disgust, given the large age gap between her and the president of her record label. Emphasizing the age and power dynamic early on in their working relationship, Mr. Combs positioned himself as a father figure and protector of Ms. Ventura. By way of example, after returning to New York after a trip to Las Vegas, during which she endured a brief hospital stay, Ms. Ventura, who by then was fully healthy, went out to a club with her friends. When Mr. Combs saw her out, he reprimanded her, telling her to go home and take care of herself. At the time, Ms. Ventura thought that her record label was looking out for her well-being and that Mr. Combs had her best interests in mind. Mr. Combs also ensured he was intertwined with Ms. Ventura's personal and social life, for instance, by inviting himself to Ms. Ventura's 21st birthday party in Las Vegas. He also brought along famous musicians and producers, thereby flaunting his celebrity status and influence in front of a young and impressionable Miss Ventura. Although Mr. Combs knew that Ms. Ventura was in a relationship at the time, and even though he was publicly in a relationship with Kim Porter, Mr. Combs nevertheless pursued Miss Ventura. At an after party in a hotel suite following Ms. Ventura's 21st birthday, Mr. Combs pulled Ms. Ventura into a bathroom and forcibly kissed her. Ms. Ventura did not consent to this unwanted contact. She immediately ran out of the bathroom and the hotel suite and cried. She told her best friend at that time about what had happened, but was too scared to tell anyone else. At the Video Music Awards the following day, Ms. Ventura's boyfriend at the time joined her and Mr. Combs at a table at the award ceremony. Mr. Combs became angry, telling Ms. Ventura that the invitation to the award ceremony was only for her and not for her significant other. The next section, Mr. Combs lures Ms. Ventura into a relationship. Despite her clear rejection of Mr. Combs's advances, Mr. Combs continued to demand that Ms. Ventura spend time with him, including for a weekend at Mr. Combs's residence in Miami and for 4 nights out in New York City. On one particular night around September 2007, Mr. Combs insisted on taking Ms. Ventura out. Ms. Ventura obliged, fearing that rejecting Mr. Combs' request would have repercussions for her album deal with Mr. Combs and his company, Bad Boy Records. Mr. Combs picked up Ms. Ventura from her apartment in Manhattan in a blue luxury vehicle. Ms. Ventura was surprised that when she got into the car, Mr. Combs was already inebriated. He handed her a pill and told her to take it. When Ms. Ventura asked what the pill was, Mr. Combs dismissed her and told her she would like it. She later learned the pill was ecstasy, something Ms. Ventura had never before tried and did not want to try. This was the first time Mr. Combs got Ms. Ventura high. Mr. Combs then proceeded to drive recklessly at very high speeds down the West Side Highway of Manhattan. Ms. Ventura was very scared, but did not dare object to Mr. Combs, who appeared drunk, high, and agitated. Mr. Combs took Ms. Ventura to an upscale lounge in downtown Manhattan, where he proceeded to get into an altercation with the security staff who would not permit Mr. Combs to enter, presumably because he was belligerent. Ms. Ventura decided to go home, but for the remainder of the night, Mr. Combs messaged Ms. Ventura frequently, complaining that she left him high and alone. In early fall 2007, Mr. Combs flexed his power and influence when he paid a promoter to create a fake flyer for a party hosted by Ms. Ventura. This fake posting allowed Ms. Ventura to have an excuse to go to Miami, Florida, and get away from her boyfriend by using the guise of a legitimate event she had to attend. Ms. Ventura was stunned at how easily Mr. Combs was able to recruit others to lie for him. Ms. Ventura was uncomfortable with the fake flyer, but because the request to go to Miami was made by the owner of her record label, and because she was scared to go against his wishes and face repercussions to her career, Ms. Ventura agreed to join Mr. Combs in Florida. During this trip to Miami, Mr. Combs provided Ms. Ventura with copious amounts of drugs. She became more intoxicated than she ever had before, and her intoxication lasted throughout the weekend trip. As she wanted Mr. Combs to continue to support her career, she felt she could not refuse Mr. Combs's urging her to take more drugs. After providing her with drugs, Mr. Combs had sexual intercourse with Miss Ventura during this trip. Within 2 years of meeting Mr. Combs, Ms. Ventura found herself lured into the immediate circle of her boss, the owner of her record label, and one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry. The next section, Mr. Combs exerts control over Ms. Ventura's career and personal life. From the very start of their relationship, Mr. Combs exerted his power and influence over Ms. Ventura. This dynamic was fueled by their nearly 20-year age difference, as well as their relative positions in the entertainment industry. With Mr. Combs considered a music mogul, and Ms. Ventura at the very start of her career as an entertainer. Mr. Combs' aggressive and demanding approach to those he worked with made it impossible for anyone to challenge him, and Ms. Ventura soon learned that Mr. Combs insisted on blind loyalty from everyone in his inner circle. Although Ms. Ventura had saved up some earnings from her young modeling career, Mr. Combs' display of wealth was intimidating to her. Mr. Combs paid for things with wads of cash and would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura, "Don't worry about money. I have money." Mr. Combs expensed lavish vacations for him and Ms. Ventura, purchased a car for her, paid for her apartment, and provided her with extensive amounts of designer clothing. Around 2008 or 2009, Mr. Combs began to rent an apartment in Manhattan for Ms. Ventura. The apartment was within walking distance of Mr. Combs' New York residence. He first showed Ms. Ventura the apartment by bringing her there along with her parents. Ms. Ventura's parents were skeptical of the mogul's display of wealth, but proud of their daughter's newfound success. Around 2010, Mr. Combs also paid for an apartment for Ms. Ventura in Los Angeles, which was located about 5 minutes away from Mr. Combs' residence. He paid for many of her apartments in California and also purchased a Jaguar for her around 2013 or 2014. All aspects of Ms. Ventura's life were controlled by either Mr. Combs or his management companies. Every event Ms. Ventura attended, from the travel to the makeup and clothing, was paid for directly by Mr. Combs and his affiliated companies. Compounding this all-encompassing intrusion into her life, Mr. Combs secured his control over the young and impressionable Ms. Ventura by introducing her to a drug-fueled lifestyle that kept her compliant. Mr. Combs first introduced Ms. Ventura to opiates around 2008 and would often have pills and other drugs out in the open like candy. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs has been addicted to prescription painkillers and took ecstasy frequently. At first, Ms. Ventura was given the prescriptions that Mr. Combs received from a doctor in Miami, Florida. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs has been addicted to prescription painkillers and took ecstasy frequently. At first, Ms. Ventura was given the prescriptions that Mr. Combs received from a doctor in Miami, Florida. Eventually, when Mr. Combs exhausted his supply of pills, he demanded that Ms. Ventura procure prescriptions from this Miami doctor in her own name. Mr. Combs also became deeply involved in Ms. Ventura's personal life, with his personal staff attending to Ms. Ventura's day-to-day travel and other needs, including medical care. On multiple occasions, Mr. Combs had Ms. Ventura's personal medical records sent directly to his email address. For instance, when Ms. Ventura began experiencing memory loss, potentially due to excessive drug use and or head injuries caused by Mr. Combs's beatings, as described below, her MRI results were provided directly to Mr. Combs. Mr. Combs also repeatedly arranged for his staff to drive Ms. Ventura to certain doctor's appointments. In this way, Mr. Combs exerted ownership over Ms. Ventura. As another example of the ways in which he manipulated Ms. Ventura and ensured obedience, early on in their relationship, he asked Ms. Ventura that she call her grandfather. When Ms. Ventura said that she referred to her grandfather as Pop Pop, Mr. Combs pervasively insisted that Ms. Ventura refer to him with that nickname. The next section, Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura's relationship becomes violent and abusive. What started as a whirlwind of celebrity meetings and drug and alcohol-fueled parties quickly turned frightening and violent. Ms. Ventura was also exposed to the intense violence that pervaded Mr. Combs's rise to fame. For example, on one occasion when Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura were using drugs together in his home, one of his security staff barged in and announced that Suge Knight, a longtime rival of Mr. Combs, was spotted at Mel's Drive-In Diner in Los Angeles. Mr. Combs began to get dressed, retrieved multiple guns from a safe, and ran out of his home to where he believed Mr. Knight was dining. Ms. Ventura became terrified and began to cry. On at least 2 occasions, Mr. Combs demanded that Ms. Ventura hold Mr. Combs's gun in her purse. Ms. Ventura had no familiarity with guns and was petrified that the firearm would accidentally go off in her purse. There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous. Over the next decade, multiple times each year, Mr. Combs would violently beat Ms. Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. After every instance in which he beat Ms. Ventura, Mr. Combs used his money and power to orchestrate extensive efforts to hide the evidence of his abuse, including by hiding Ms. Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. In one such instance, after a party with Jay-Z, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura repeatedly in an escalade, including by kicking and hitting her. He forced her outside of the vehicle on Fifth Avenue in New York City. She was eventually able to hail a cab and get to her apartment in Manhattan, where she cried in fear, realizing there was no one she could tell about what had happened at the hands of this incredibly powerful man. She spent the subsequent 3 days hiding in her apartment. In January 2009, after Mr. Combs learned that Ms. Ventura spoke to another music manager at a party in Los Angeles, he became enraged. She had hoped speaking to this manager would allow her to further grow her career and that Mr. Combs would be happy for her. But instead, he became extremely angry and pulled her out of the club where the party was taking place. In the car leaving the club, Mr. Combs beat Ms. Ventura, pushing her into a corner of the vehicle and stomping on her face. Mr. Combs' security staff, Roger Bonds, tried to stop the beating, but was unable to de-escalate the situation. When the car arrived at Mr. Combs' residence, Ms. Ventura attempted to run away, but Mr. Combs followed her and proceeded to again kick her in the face. Ms. Ventura was bleeding profusely and was ushered into Mr. Combs's home, where she began to throw up from the violent assault. Upon recognizing the damage he had done and the physical evidence of his abuse, Mr. Combs panicked and forced his staff to bring Ms. Ventura to a hotel suite at the London Hotel in Los Angeles, where she was required to stay for a week. During this stay, as her injuries from the beating healed, Ms. Ventura began to fully realize that Mr. Combs's tremendously loyal network not only knew about and witnessed his assault, but also that these witnesses were not willing to do anything meaningful to stop Mr. Combs's behavior. She recognized that she was powerless and that reporting Mr. Combs to the authorities would not alter Mr. Combs's status or influence, but would merely give Mr. Combs another excuse to hurt her. While in the hotel, she asked to go home to her parents, but Mr. Combs wouldn't let her leave. She lied to her mother when asked about an online gossip forum that reported the assault. Mr. Combs proceeded to instruct his assistants to purchase excessive amounts of gifts for Ms. Ventura, which were delivered to the hotel room where she remained trapped. Ms. Ventura was terrified, isolated, and unable to see a pathway out of Mr. Combs's abusive hold on her life. She found herself becoming numb to the abuse she was experiencing and became entirely beholden to Mr. Combs's demands. She began to blindly follow his instructions out of fear of, again, being on the receiving end of a vicious beating. By Mr. Combs's own admission, his relationship with Ms. Ventura was like Bobby and Whitney, a clear acknowledgement of the unequal power dynamic and excessive domestic violence that permeated their relationship. From the outside looking in, Ms. Ventura had heard others refer to her relationship with Mr. Combs as akin to Ike and Tina, her abusive partner, who also owned her label and therefore held her future success in his hands, had fully exerted control over every aspect of her life. The next section, Mr. Combs forces Ms. Ventura into sex trafficking. Within a few months of beginning a romantic relationship with 40-year-old Mr. Combs, the 22-year-old Ms. Ventura felt beholden to his whims and demands. While in New York City, Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura that he wanted to engage in a fantasy of his called voyeurism. Mr. Combs said it would turn him on if he saw Ms. Ventura with another man. The first time, Mr. Combs hired a man and brought the man to his home in Los Angeles. The man, Mr. Combs, and Ms. Ventura wore masquerade masks and ingested drugs. Mr. Combs directed Ms. Ventura to perform acts with this man while Mr. Combs watched and pleasured himself as he directed Ms. Ventura and the man to do specific things. The entire encounter lasted multiple days. Mr. Combs began to call the arrangement a freak-off or FO. He would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura at random moments that he wanted an FO, and Ms. Ventura was eventually expected to facilitate the location and the hiring of male sex workers. At certain points during Ms. Ventura and Mr. Combs's relationship, he would insist on an FO weekly. Mr. Combs would repeatedly tell Ms. Ventura that this practice was our thing and our secret. FOs would take place in hotel suites, including Trump International Hotel in Columbus Circle, the London Hotel in Los Angeles, the Intercontinental Century City, the Intercontinental Atlanta, the Intercontinental New York City, the One Hotel in New York and in Miami, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in New York and in Miami, the Beverly Hills Hotel, and Shutters on the Beach in Los Angeles. One occasion, around 2013, Mr. Combs had an FO set up at the Intercontinental Hotel in New York City, after which he was charged with tens of thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs's chief of staff, Tony Fletcher, paid the invoice charged by the hotel. Ms. Ventura was eventually instructed to use websites and escort services to find male sex workers to participate in the FOs. Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura to search for certain anatomy parts that were large, on the website. Sometimes Mr. Combs would pay to fly male sex workers to his location, including to multiple cities in the U.S. as well as abroad. He required Ms. Ventura and his staff to help him make these arrangements. Mr. Combs's assistants would help to set up the FOs, including by setting up the hotel suites with baby oil and Astroglide. Mr. Combs always supplied Ms. Ventura and the worker with large amounts of drugs before and during the FOs. Ms. Ventura was given ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and alcohol in excessive amounts during the FOs, which allowed her to disassociate during these horrific encounters. It became commonplace to get IV fluids in the days after an FO to recover from the excessive substances pushed upon her. Ms. Ventura was required to dress up in lingerie for an FO, and Mr. Combs insisted she wear white nail polish to contrast her nails with the skin of the black men he hired to have sex with her. During the FO, Mr. Combs would instruct Ms. Ventura to pour excessive amounts of oil over herself. Mr. Combs would then instruct Ms. Ventura and the workers to speak to each other and then would specifically tell Ms. Ventura where to touch the worker. During the FOs, in addition to directing Ms. Ventura and pleasuring himself, Mr. Combs would use his phone, laptop, and tablet to film Ms. Ventura having sex with the hired worker. He treated the forced encounter as a personal art project, adjusting the candles he used for lighting to frame the videos he took. While Ms. Ventura quickly deleted any photographs or video of these acts if they were taken on her phone, Mr. Combs repeatedly made clear that he retained many videos of Ms. Ventura during FOs. Even when she deleted the videos, Mr. Combs would tell Ms. Ventura that he was able to recover deleted videos from her devices. On one occasion, he sat next to her on a flight and made her watch a video she thought she had deleted, reinforcing her inability to escape and the immense power he held over her. Mr. Combs would pay the male workers with a few $1,000s in cash for their services. During some FOs, Mr. Combs would become extremely intoxicated and would hit Ms. Ventura in front of the male workers. Ms. Ventura was repulsed by Mr. Combs's demands, but between the physical beatings and recognizing his incredible power and incredible temper, Ms. Ventura became petrified of her partner and boss and felt she could not say no. He even would present her with lavish gifts prior to or in the middle of the FOs, seemingly acknowledging the ways in which these forced encounters constituted work for Ms. Ventura and that he needed to compensate her for this work. At one point, he had given her so many designer bracelets for FOs and immediately following his brutal beatings that she felt she was shackled by his presence. Frequently, her anxiety before an FO would become so great that she would become physically ill, sometimes to the point of vomiting. While kneeling over the toilet, Mr. Combs would shame her into performing for him, eventually forcing her to get up and proceed with the encounter. She knew firsthand that telling Mr. Combs that she did not want to engage in FOs was met with anger and violence. In addition, any suggestion that Ms. Ventura would refuse the FO or otherwise report Mr. Combs's abuse was met with ultimatums by Mr. Combs, who would say that Ms. Ventura could not go to the police because she had a lot to lose. Around August 2015, for example, in the middle of a surprise birthday dinner for Ms. Ventura's 29th birthday, Mr. Combs insisted that Ms. Ventura leave the party and go to a hotel for an FO. When she expressed she did not want to go, Mr. Combs had Ms. Ventura cornered by his security staff in order to force her to leave with him. After this FO, Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura went back to the hotel room that Ms. Ventura was staying in, where some of Ms. Ventura's friends were already hanging out. Mr. Combs was severely intoxicated, and at one point during the night, picked up one of Ms. Ventura's friends like a child and dangled the friend over the balcony of the 17th floor hotel suite. Ms. Ventura and her friends were scared by Mr. Combs's erratic behavior But Ms. Ventura was heavily sedated because of the drugs she took to participate in the FO and therefore was unable to respond to Mr. Combs's terrifying behavior. The FOs became work for Ms. Ventura, and despite her protests, Mr. Combs insisted these were intricately staged and forced sexual encounters between Ms. Ventura and various male sex workers. So we're going to end this here just due to the length of the first part. We'll finish up in part 2. Just crazy, disgusting, and we are going to hear this and a lot more when this goes to trial. Join me for part 2. That'll be out later on. We will see you soon.